There's a specific kind of frustration that doesn't come from being broke. It comes from doing things right. You did the research, you watched the videos, you ran the numbers, you learned about taxes, exclusions, cost of living, geo arbitrage. You didn't just leave impulsively, you planned. And yet, something still didn't release. The pressure didn't disappear, the weight didn't lift. The feeling that you were still being managed by something larger didn't go away. That's the part people don't know how to talk about. Because when the math works, you're not supposed to feel trapped anymore. So when you do, you start assuming the problem must be you. When people talk about financial freedom abroad, the conversation stays very technical. They talk about how far money goes, they talk about tax advantages, they talk about filing requirements, they talk about exclusions and loopholes and optimization, and a lot of it is factually correct. You can reduce your tax burden, you can lower your monthly expenses, you can structure things more efficiently than you ever could back home. So when someone points that out, they're not wrong. But here's the problem: being correct about the numbers doesn't automatically translate into feeling free. And that disconnect is where most people quietly get stuck. If the system was only about money, then smart financial moves would break it. But they don't, which tells you something important. The system isn't primarily extracting money, it's extracting position. Money is just the most visible layer. When people move abroad expecting relief, they're expecting a financial release. But what they run into is an identity tether that doesn't snap just because geography changed. That's why people say things like, I should feel better than this, and they actually mean it. Once that realization sets in, people don't all react the same way. Not because they're different kinds of people, but because they're responding to the same pressure from different angles. You can watch it happen in real time if you pay attention. Some people double down on correctness. They learn more rules, more strategies, more structures, more compliance pathways. They become very good at explaining why their setup is technically sound. And again, they're not wrong. But their nervous system is still braced because even when the math works, they still feel watched by the future, still obligated to remain legible to institutions, still tethered to outcomes that haven't happened yet. So the optimization never actually ends. Other people go the opposite direction. They just emotionally check out. They stop caring about optimization altogether. They lower their expectations. They tell themselves they've opted out. But underneath that disengagement is often a quiet resignation, not freedom, just distance. The system still exists, they've just stopped arguing with it. And then there's the largest group: people who did everything right but can't explain why something still feels unresolved. They're not failing, they're not lost, they're not naive. They're just stuck between two truths that don't reconcile easily. The numbers improved, but the pressure didn't dissolve. Here's the perspective most people are missing: the system doesn't rely on extracting the maximum amount of money from you, it relies on keeping you structurally accountable. accountable to timelines, to future obligations, to institutional visibility, to identities that require continuous proof. Even when your income is excluded, even when your expenses are lower, even when you're doing it right, the system remains intact because you remain legible to it. And that's the part geography doesn't automatically fix. Abroad, you expect contrast, you expect relief. So when you still feel pressure, it creates cognitive dissonance. You're surrounded by people who seem less burdened, lives that look simpler, rhythms that don't revolve around constant future proofing. And yet, you're carrying an invisible structure with you, not because you failed to escape, but because escape was never purely spatial. This isn't saying you shouldn't optimize. It's not saying taxes don't matter. It's not saying moving abroad is pointless. It's saying that financial correctness was never the full equation, and expecting it to be is what creates the letdown. Most people don't need more information, they need a clearer map of what they're actually trying to leave. Not a country, not a tax code, not a cost of living spreadsheet, but a system that trained them to equate correctness with freedom. And until that distinction becomes visible, even the smartest moves will feel strangely incomplete. Not because they failed, but because they were solving the wrong layer.